Hello, my name is Josh. I'd like to begin my talk with a statistic. A National Academy of Sciences 2019 study found that the lifetime possibility of a black man in the United States of America being murdered by police is 1 in 1,000. I think that's an incredible statistic that bears a real moment of thought. If you had a 1 in 1,000 lifetime possibility of dying from something, you would not do that thing. If you had a 1 in 1,000 lifetime possibility of dying from a glass of water, tomorrow we would pour trillions of dollars into finding a safer alternative to water and a better way to consume it. And that seems like a silly comparison. Water is a necessity. We need it to live, so on and so forth. But that is the reality of a black man's existence on a day-to-day in the United States. Whether they leave the house or stay at home, their existence is a gamble every day. And I want to know, how did we get here, and is there anything short of violence that will solve this issue? The world we currently occupy is, for all intents and purposes, probably the best it's ever been. That's typically how time and progress work, always forward, never back. But the last few years have begun to seem like that is beginning to unravel. 60 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began a crusade of passive resistance to initiate change in this country for people of color. They would travel and would outwardly disobey segregation laws in an attempt to achieve equality and equity. During this time, much like today, he was repeatedly told to just wait, and that change would happen, and that breaking laws was not the answer. King wrote, quote, "For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ears of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never." King saw that there were no alternatives left but resistance when requesting and pleading fell to deaf ears. Our country today, in terms of equality and equity, exists in its current form owing much to him and his passive resistance movement. I was born 18 years after he wrote a letter from Birmingham jail. In that 18 years, the world that he occupied was so vastly different than the world that I was born into because of him and passive resistance. I never had to encounter segregated lunch counters or restrooms or lynchings or burning crosses. Did these things happen? Still, absolutely they did, but not with the frequency that they did in his time, and thanks to him and his movement. Though so many amazing changes have been made towards a united society and equality and equity, we have entered into a time that just seems more difficult to break out of. Passive resistance seemingly no longer has the ability to succeed like it once did. And these are for reasons that I feel are easy to observe. From the top, we have given more authority to our positions of power, such as governors and our president. The chains of process have been eroded, giving singular human beings far more power than should be possible. Further, we have also militarized our police officers due to the unfounded and ever-looming threat of terrorism post 9/11. In this, as we approach this more globalized world, in a country, though, that places so little value on the life of a black man, passive resistance is just not possible. Every day, the news is filled with stories of police murder of unarmed people of color, and everyday punishment for those involved seems to just evade us entirely. How can you passively resist your way out of a militarized police force that is inherently designed to kill and put down? One way you can do that is certainly vote. Thanks to Dr. King and passive resistance, today people of color, all of us included, have the ability to vote. There are no longer comprehension tests to make sure you can read before you vote. There are no longer intimidation mobs at polling places. Mostly no longer intimidation mobs at polling places. You can always vote. Unless the people already in power want to do something to once again strip away that right. For instance, in 2021, Georgia enacted new laws requiring IDs to vote and heavily restricted mail-in voting. They did this under the guise of election security. Which is, even at a cursory glance, is bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. The instances of voter fraud and election fraud in this country are so scarce. It is so rare, it doesn't even warrant discussion. It just does not happen in this country. Voter ID laws and restricting mail-in voting is a way to suppress lower income voters, which in Georgia happens to be primarily, more than primarily, overwhelming majority people of color, which is deserving of hours and hours of speech outside of this. I do not have the time for that. To get an ID, you need to stand in line away from work at an understaffed DMV for hours waiting, and then you have to spend money that you likely do not have for the privilege of having this ID. Same goes for restricting mail-in voting. Mail-in voting requires no effort. Voting in person requires you to wait in line for hours away from work where you could be making money. There are laws that allow you to leave work to vote, but they do not compel your employer to pay you for that time. These things inherently and immediately affect low-income voters, which once again in these places are people of color, which is a huge, huge other issue. If you are unable to vote, and if you are killed, if you passively protest or resist, what are your alternatives? King says, quote, "Through the Negro Church, the dimension of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, I am convinced that by now many streets of the South would be flowing with the floods of blood." King recognized that with the ability of nonviolence gone, the only option would be violence. Current organizations such as Black Lives Matter are constantly demonized for both peaceful protests and passive resistance. They are called rioters. They are lumped in with looters and agitators. They are told to wait for change and that protesting isn't the way to go about things. When you are demonized for protesting, assumed to have been a criminal when you're murdered by police, or told to wait when simply requesting change, when does violence become the only option? I don't think we've arrived there. Some changes are slowly being made, more slowly than needed, certainly, but changes nonetheless. Excuse me. Police are slowly being defunded after years of budgetary abuse. These voting restrictions are constantly being knocked down in court as unconstitutional. Is it possible that violence was actually the answer 60 years ago? If King had decided against sit-ins and against passive resistance and had marched on Washington hand in hand with Malcolm X, bullets, bats, guns, would anyone still attempt these backslides today? I don't know. But I believe that anyone today that says violence is never the answer has paid no attention to the entirety of recorded human history, especially our own country's history. Our country was smelted with blood and molded by violence. It would just be nice to not have to do it all over again. But for now, we will hold our bats and not our breath. Thank you.